Well, good morning and welcome everybody to another edition of Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Carrow, and with me today I have a collection of people who are going to help us explore the history of rowing for women in Great Britain. Let me just ask them each to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their history in the sport. Kate.
Kate Grose. I first started rowing when I was at university and at Cambridge, and I continued through the Blue Boat system and then joined the national squad when I moved to London in 1986. I rowed internationally for about 7 years and then retired after the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. And since then, I've rowed regularly with great fun at club level and now at veteran club level.
Fabulous. Pauline.
I started rowing at Weybridge Ladies Rowing Club in the late 60s when I was 11 and joined the women's national senior squad when I was 16. Raced internationally for 8 years and did a couple of Olympics and some World Championships. Then I did a comeback here in 86 and raced the Commonwealth Games and the World Rowing Championships. I currently go to Masters Championships, FISA Masters Championships, pretty much every year and row veteran club level.
Fantastic. Jo.
Hi, I'm Joanna Toch. I started rowing when I was 16 years old at Weybridge Ladies, which was in 1977. I was in a club crew that went to the Junior World Championships in 79, and then I went into the women's squad in 1980 and went to the Olympics in the 8. I was in the national squad through 81, 82, 83. I stroked the 8 in 81, we were 6, which was quite good. And then in 84, I was in the 4, and then took a year off. And then I went back into rowing in 86 onwards, and I went down to lightweight, and I got a silver medal at the World Championships in 89, did 88, 89, 90, I was 4th, and then I stopped rowing in 1992, and then I started again about 3 years ago, and I now compete at masters level.
And Helena.
Hi, I'm Helena Smalman-Smith. I'm here as a historian of what the other ladies have been doing, and then many contemporaries from the GB National Squad. It's a really interesting field to be working in, but I am also myself a rower and mostly a cox, which I started doing as Kate did at university about 30 years ago.
Fabulous. In fact, I've been coxed by Helena, so I can attest to her skills. Now, we all know that many sports have professionalised over recent years, and rowing became professional in the UK as a result of two things. One was the National Lottery, and the other was a recognition that Britain was not going to win consistently at the top level unless there was more money in the sport. So I'd like to start by flicking back to your years as rowers. Can you describe your average training week when you were an international? Jo?
It would depend. If I go back to when I was open weight, I'll just run through it really quickly. It was something along, it's a long time ago now, something along the lines of the weekends being 2 really big sessions on Saturday on the water, another big session on Sunday morning. Monday, weights, just running and weights in the gym. Tuesday, I think we had a run in the morning, and depending on the time of year, it would either be in the gym or on the water in the evening. Wednesday was a run and gym session. Thursday was the same as Tuesday. Fridays would always be off. So and we fitted that around study or work. When I was a lightweight, the training was a sort of more distance endurance work. So the runs would be about an hour and a half. The gym training would be, say, 50 lifts at lightweight. So it would be a similar pattern, but it was lighter weights and more endurance work.
Pauline?
Well, it's quite hard to think of it, but when for the majority of my international career, which obviously took place in the 70s, there was no such thing as an ergo. So, like Joe, we would do, during the winter particularly, you would do 2 days in the gym and 2 days running during the week, and then do probably 4 big sessions over the weekend. That sort of was then supplemented by, and this was a huge innovation, a couple of morning outings during the week, which was a huge innovation. Up to that point, people really didn't row in the morning. So we would go out in singles, and this was on the tideway. There was nobody else out, so nobody bothered with lights or anything like that because you didn't have to. So it was a wholly different kind of regime to that which exists these days.
And Pauline, where was your training based out of?
Largely from the Hammersmith Boathouse for the water work, and the gym. We trained at Lynn Clark was teaching PE at Paddington School for a lot of the time. So that would be from 74 really through 76 when I trained with the main squad. Then after that, when I got to sculling in the double with Astrid Ayling, we trained at Kingston, basically, largely.
Kate.
That would be the water.
Kate, tell us about your experiences.
Well, by the time I was rowing in the national squad in London, like Pauline, I was based almost entirely at the ARA Boathouse at Hammersmith. And we did our waterwork sessions from there during the week. We trained in the gym at the Rutland, which was behind a pub next to the boathouse. Although we did, for a while, use the Elliott School in Putney, which was organised when Ron Needs was in charge. We used to do at least 2 early mornings in the winter, and evening waterwork sessions in the summer as well. That was midweek, and weights and running, and by then they had invented the ergo, although all ergo tests were done on the Jessing ergo rather than the Concept 2. And all the women of that era will remember that the women had to do 2,500 metres for their ergo test, not 2,000 metres, which further. Weekends, we did 2 water sessions both days, and they introduced training on Friday as well, which was just 1 session. It was meant to be a cross-training session on Friday, but it really meant that you didn't actually have a day off at all. I remember it was sessions a week, but the length of the sessions was much shorter than it would be today, because of course everybody had to train in the morning and then get to work, and then leave work and get to training. It wasn't like you could train and eat and sleep and train and eat and sleep and so on. You had to cram it all around a full-time job, or for those that were students, a full-time education. So I think it was the quality was good, but the duration of each session was much shorter than it is now. And they hadn't invented doing of UT2 because you simply couldn't have fitted it in around everything else.
So that's a very interesting pattern of training volume increase plus the flexible locations. Now, every athlete starts from nothing and ends up as an international. And of course, on that pathway, there are people who've helped you and clubs that have helped you. Can you tell us, Jo, what was your personal pathway up from Weybridge Rowing Club?
I think I was really lucky. I joined the club on the same day as someone who I had swum against. And we looked at each other and thought, oh, okay, we met before because we tied in a race. So that was someone called Jane Cross, and she just joined the club on the same day. And there were 2 others there, Kate and Belinda, and they'd rowed since they were 13. So Jane and I had swum, and I had done quite a few other sports when I'd been young. I lived by the river, and we were incredibly lucky that all four of us were at that club. And even luckier, and unbeknownst to me, when I joined, it was an all-women's club. So I thought at 16 I was joining and I was going to meet lots of really nice boys. I didn't meet any. And I just got dragged into this sport and really good friendships. And in the second year, we ended up in a crew together. And I think it was just a really happy combination. We went to the Junior World Championships as a club crew, which was very unusual. We just raced and beat all the composites. And
who was your
we had a coach called Bill Stagg, and I want to give him a really big shout because he had, I think Pauline will probably know him. I don't think he'd ever rowed, but he was a fabulous coach, and he was a little eccentric, and he had probably ideas 20 years before his time, and he would throw I can remember him throwing his bike down in just anger as he cycled alongside, and you know, I heard the sort of swear words I'd never heard at age 16. I was quite well brought up. But he looked after us, and I think that what he taught us went a long way. We were technically very good, and that's how we did well. We hadn't lifted a weight before we went to the World Championships, as I remember. We were just technically really, really good, and we really worked as a team well together. And then the next year, because Jane and I were not juniors anymore, we went into the national squad, and we couldn't really compete on the weights or anything like that, but we were just very good technically, and we just didn't have any fear. So I ended up being in the top boat for the Olympics based on lots of seat racing. So I was very fortunate, right at the right time.
So Helena, Jo just touched on an interesting thing there, that a club crew got selected as the international representation for Great Britain. Do you have any insight into how selections happened and why club crews were picked?
Well, I mean, this is an ongoing thing in all sports, really, and the England football team and the problems of their commitments to their own clubs, who are paying their salaries, and then how much time they get to train as the England football team. So there's no perfect solution to the whole thing, and it's a debate that's come and gone a lot in the history of British competitive rowing, both men and women. I think in the men's crews, the phrase private armies was often talked about a lot. So, particular clubs, particularly the big successful clubs, didn't want to be losing their oarsmen to go off and train with the national squad. There was also, quite a lot of the time a certain feeling that was an unfair thing to do to clubs, and that clubs were so critical to the lifeblood of British rowing that you really shouldn't be taking their best rowers out of it. There was one lovely report I came across, which just said, it would seem such a shame to take the best rowers out of their club crews for the whole summer that we didn't. So, we just then sent a club crew, even though it didn't contain the best rowers, to go to an international event. I think in those days as well, there was probably far less disposable income for people. So it was very, very hard for the composite crews to get together. So although it was recognised that, if you take a club crew, it isn't necessarily the best 8 or 4, however many rowers that the country could come up with, it might still actually be the fastest crew compared with having a composite that only gets a week together before a World Championships. So it was a compromise that had to be made at the time, given the total lack of training facilities, money to travel around the place. I don't know if people had less leave from their jobs then, but sometimes it seems like that was the case.
Good. Now, Pauline, can you give us your memories of selection? How did crews get picked in the 70s?
Well, I think Penny Tudor introduced a very regimented sort of setup, basically. There would be a trials weekend in October usually, which was the initial trials weekend, which sorted out, the sheep from the goats a bit, and the people that would go forward in the squad. And then there would be trials weekends basically throughout the winter. And certainly for the 76 Olympics, we had a trials weekend every weekend throughout the winter of that year up at Nottingham. So to some extent what Helena is saying is correct. But of course, there was much more opportunity at those weekends to actually mix and match the crews a bit. And you were just basically expected to fund it yourself. People were a bit short of money, but then of course they had jobs which meant that they could actually fund, but you did need to have a very understanding employer. And I was very lucky that at that time I was working for Midland Bank, who were actually astonishingly forgiving. And in fact, when we went to the Olympics in 76, they gave me 6 weeks paid leave to go to the Olympics, which was very good of them.
Fantastic. Now, moving on, obviously, hindsight's a fabulous thing, but Kate, if you had your time again, what would you do differently?
My goodness, that's an interesting question. I think what I would do differently is I would try and get more rest, because I know that working and trying to organise rowing around a full-time job meant that I was always very tired. And I don't know to what extent it would have improved my or our collective performance, because a lot of people were in the same situation if we had had more rest. But I think that given the circumstances, that's about the only thing I could have really tried to work on. But of course, when in my case, I was trying to run a business, I was trying to establish a new business. I had this silly idea that if you worked for yourself, you could have as much time off as you liked, which is why I started my own business, in order to be able to continue my rowing. And of course, actually, when you run your own business, it's not quite like that. And I think that's the biggest single thing that would have made a change. But whether it would have made me or my crews go any faster, I simply don't know.
Jo, do you have an anecdote about what you do differently?
The only thing that's been said to me is this, that from 1980 to 1984, every one of the crew of the Weybridge Four went and represented their country, and we all went to the Olympics. But we were always in different boats, we were all part of the squad, and not one time did a coach ever put us in our crew again. And it seems to me it would have been interesting to see. We were doing much more training, we all trained for many years, but we never were put in the crew again. And we had a reunion row about a couple of years ago, and a couple of those people hadn't even been in a boat for years. And I got in and we just did, bow pair, and I just thought, ooh, that catch is really quick. Whoa. We just went paddling away. So I just think it's a shame that never happened. But the thing is, when you're young, you're in a squad setup, you kind of do what your coach says. And I just think that there was no one to speak up for us and say, try them again, see how fast they go with a bit more training. So, you can never regret things, but it would just have been interesting to know how that would have gone.
Pauline?
I think looking back, I could have believed more in the possible, by which I mean I should have been more prepared to sort of believe in possible dreams than I did. I got too bound up, I think, in being beaten regularly by the Eastern Bloc, who were in their pomp at the time, and it seemed to me that they were virtually unbeatable. And I think had I been able to believe more that they were beatable, then perhaps I could have done better.
Tell us a little bit then about the perceptions of the Eastern Bloc countries, because sport was a political thing in those days. How did it feel to be on the other end racing them?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I felt that very often that British crews used the whole drug thing as a bit of an excuse for not doing well. I always felt that we could have trained harder and pushed ourselves more and had more ambition. And I think very often, oh, they're much bigger than us, no, they're taking drugs, was very often a bit of an excuse rather than the game changer that it was suggested. But looking back, I will say that actually the difference was that they did have the opportunity to rest more than we did, and that would have made a huge difference.
They were full-time athletes, of course, at a time that you obviously were not full-time athletes. Now, Kate, you once told me an anecdote about coming face-to-face with the East German women's eight after you had left rowing. Can you remember meeting in the hotel?
Yes, I can. I went to watch the World Championships when they were in Lucerne in
2001.
Not all that long ago, probably. Thank you, Rebecca. And I went because Lucerne was always my favourite regatta. I think it was always everybody's favourite regatta because it was such a beautiful place, and which was unusual. And I was staying in a little hotel overlooking Lake Lucerne, and at breakfast time, there was a group of very large women who were being very much feted by the person running the hotel. He obviously knew them well. They were getting much better treatment than the rest of us, much more food, and I was quite hungry. And after a while, I realised that they were the 1988 East German Women's Eight in its entirety. And I recognised them only because one of the girls hadn't changed at all. And she was the only one in the crew that had been remarkable because she had dark hair instead of blonde hair. And she was relatively small. She was probably about 5'10". The others were all much taller. All of the others had become enormously fat. I mean, hugely fat. And they were all smoking as well, which was interesting. The single dark-haired girl, brunette girl, was still exactly the same as she had been, plus a few years, I suppose. And I thought to myself, well, perhaps after all that, it wasn't so great because they may have an awful lot of gold medals hanging around their necks, but I'll probably live a lot longer than they will. And I remember thinking, well, maybe it was all worthwhile after all. Maybe what goes around comes around.
Very interesting observation. Thank you for that. Now, rowing obviously is now a professional sport, and I'm sure you're all acquainted with professional athletes in the sport. But as an outsider looking at the modern day British team, what do you think rowing has lost now that it's fully professional and fully funded, Helena?
Well, I suppose I have a slightly different perspective from the other three here because I was just an ordinary club member. I belonged to Kingston Rowing Club in the early 90s, which had quite a few former internationals and aspiring internationals and current internationals at the time I was there, but I wasn't going to trials as a cox. I was, I was just coxing the club crews. But we had this huge advantage that all through the winter, the ex and the aspiring internationals were training with us. So I remember, just a good club rower said, I watched Alison Barnett, who'd been to the Olympics, and I watched how she trained, and I copied that behaviour and how she behaved out of the boat and how she behaved when she was going out for a race, because obviously she was very good at it, so I tried to learn what she was doing. And nowadays, with all the internationals only being at the rowing lake at Caversham and not being in their clubs all winter, it's much more effective for them, but the normal club members do lose an opportunity to learn.
Pauline?
I think what we had was an ability to be a bit more independent. We had options so that, yes, you might, if you fell out with your coach, find yourself thrown out of the squad, but you didn't lose your livelihood at the same time. You didn't have to wonder where the next penny was coming from, and your funding wasn't cut with a month's notice, which I think is what happens these days. So I think in some respects, you were able to keep a sense of your own independence more, I think.
Jo?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. think Helena's point's a very interesting one, because I really don't have a clue as to what they're all doing, because they're not coming back. And I just worry that there are people who are picked out. They are hothouse, they go through, it's all fantastic, absolutely marvellous. But then I wonder if they're going to come back. I wonder if it's still fun for them. I know that lots of people my age have children so I hear anecdotes, I hear of lots of injuries. And that worries me, because, rowing's always got to be fun. You've got to love it. No one's going to do all of that really hard yards without loving it. And I hope that they do. And I hope that the people that are in the teams, and I see how superb their technique is. And I just think they're marvellous, seeing these, 14, 15, 16-year-olds with this incredible technique and doing all this training, looking superb. And I hope they love it. I hope they enjoy it, because we did. We wouldn't have done it otherwise. It's tough. It's tough to do it with a job and as a student, but it must also be really tough for them, as Pauline says, doing it as your main thing. I'm not sure I could have done that. So I really admire the fact that they're doing it, and I hope they're having a lot of fun.
Kate, what do you think we've lost in the sport?
I think what we have lost is the independence. And I mean, Pauline and Joe both touched on it there. It certainly wouldn't have suited my sort of psyche, because I've done my best when I've had my back most to the wall. And for me, the competitiveness under was almost as much of a challenge as anything in the sport. And I loved that. But I would have not enjoyed being a full-time sportsman as far as I'm still concerned. Sport is a game. It's a very serious game when you're doing it at that level, at the level even that we did, because we put an enormous amount of effort into it. But I wouldn't have wanted it to be the be-all and end-all. I wouldn't have wanted to be a paid athlete. I really wouldn't have wanted to be. It wouldn't have suited me, and I would have been unhappy. So I think that opportunity is lost. But then, of course, not everybody is like me. And so it's difficult to it's difficult to be judgmental. I think we had a better time, even though we had much less support financially, physically, mentally, everything. We used to do our trials sometimes at Thorpe Park, where I look back now, there wasn't even a cold water tap to fill your water bottles. There wasn't a loo. If you wanted to go to the loo, you had to go behind a bush, and it was overlooked by the M3. And we just thought that was completely normal. We didn't even cross our minds to complain or say we were cold or anything. And it did give you an enormous sense of achievement. And so I think that is lost. But of course, the professionalism and the equipment and the coaching is fantastic now. And look where it's got us. We win medals every single time. And I never won a medal. I'm very envious, but I'm not jealous.
Do any of the rest of you want to come back on that?
Only one point, because it's such an interesting topic, that we didn't have psychologists, we didn't have nutritionists, we didn't have any of that backup. So maybe that was tough, but then maybe that's great, because we had to make our own psychology, because we had to go out there and we had to race people. And I know Pauline's very sweet about it. Oh, we could have trained harder. No, they're on a state-sponsored drug program. So, really we should be going all up a level and taking out those medals, frankly. But we went out and we raced and we didn't complain. We raced 1,000 meters, which was brutal. It's like banging your head against a wall continuously. And just went and did it. And so we learned a lot about ourselves. So you had to be brave and fearless. And so we were lucky, and I enjoyed it. And just like Kate, I'm not sure I could actually hack doing the thing as a full-time. I'd probably just run off. But hats off to those that can do it. I admire them.
I think another thing that I'd add, again, more from my sort of normal club rower perspective, is that you know, in the old days, because athletes were much more connected to their clubs before they became internationals, that was their pathway to becoming an international. You had to be good first from being a club rower. That it meant that they had a strong club base to come back to after they'd finished their international career if they wanted to carry on rowing. And certainly Pauline did a lot, you know, has rowed continuously, really, haven't you? You know, and actually an awful lot of rowing, even in this day and age of clubs having paid coaches quite often, is done on volunteers. So you just slightly wonder, from the club perspective, from the little local regatta perspective, who are the people, you know, are we going to get any of the internationals back contributing to all of this thing? Or are we actually not? Because they don't really have clubs that they're necessarily very tied to. It'll be interesting to see the situation in maybe sort of 10 to 15 years' time, as some of the earliest athletes who have been fully funded have finished their international careers, got their working careers sorted out, and they might be at a stage where they could be doing things in just little normal local rowing, or not.
So I've got one reflection back on that point. Debbie Flood was known to me because she was a member of Tideway Scullers. She learned to row there, and she was a representative as a Tideway Scullers member, and then switched to being a Leander member, partly because she trained out of Leander. She lived in that part of the country, but Leander gave free food to any athlete who was a Leander member as part of their club if you represented Great Britain. And she switched over, but she then, after her own international career was over, went back, and she's now the captain of Leander Rowing Club, and I believe managing a successful career transition at the same time. Pauline, did you want to add something?
Well, only that there's certainly picking up on Helena's point of a strong kind of club background. In fact, the 3 happiest years I had in some respects in international rowing was when I was based at Kingston Rowing Club and rowing with Astrid Ayling, basically because there was this fantastic kind of club atmosphere, club backup that you had. So you could have an absolutely rubbish training session, then be coming back to the club and enjoying the kind of support of your club mates. I found rowing in the squad as such, when it was purely squad member, it was very high pressure and not necessarily an especially enjoyable experience. But it was much, much more fun to actually row in a club environment. And in fact, at the time, which was in the mid to late 70s, German rowing was very much stronger than rowing in Great Britain, and that was very, very much based in the clubs, and still is, I believe.
We're going to take a message from our sponsor today. Coming into winter means training time indoors when the weather is cruel to rowers. Make every session count by using an RP3 for your indoor rowing. Designed by expert engineer Casper Riekers, this erg is a rowing boat simulator. That means the movements you make are nearly identical to your movements in a boat. Teaching and learning the correct movement pattern is a key to successful fast crews. Alan Campbell's coach, Bill Barry, told us that every time he trained on a regular erg, it took 2 water sessions to untrain the movement pattern he acquired just from one erg session. Now, Bill is a very skilled coach with an expert eye. His athlete, Alan, is also very skillful, and his technique is strong and has been reinforced by thousands of practice strokes. Shouldn't you ensure your crews stick to the same technique on the water as well as in the gym? Every coach knows how tough it is to uncoach bad technique. It takes hours of drills to prevent the athlete reverting to bad habits. Set up your technique coaching for consistency on land and on water by using RP3. Row Perfect UK sells RP3 and also coaching resources, so you can learn how to get the best returns and train your crew's movement patterns on land to support what you teach on the water. Get in touch to organise a trial for your club or search our website, rowperfect.co.uk. Now, we've got a question from a listener, Chris George, from Thames Rowing Club, ULBC, Tyrian, London Rowing Club, and the 1980 Rowing Club USA. He really does have a very long list of memberships. And Chris has asked, which coach was the most influential in your development? Pauline, kick off with us.
Well, as Chris coached me in 1980 for the Olympics, I would be very churlish not to say Chris. But I would say probably the most influential coach was my father, who taught me to scull and was my coach for until I joined the national squad. And he basically gave me the kind of work ethic and was the ability to concentrate, really, which I think you actually need. And a lot of people don't really have. You know, you do have to be able to concentrate on one thing for a very long time. And one of my early drills was rowing at 5 strokes a minute for 5 miles and that kind of thing, which did actually help the concentration levels considerably.
I would have loved to have been coached by your father. How amazing! And what a great compliment to the both of you. Parental-child coaching relationships are challenging at the best of times. Kate, who was your most influential coach?
Well, I have to name 2. I'm sorry, it's cheating, but I have to name 2. First taught me when I was learning to row at university, and anyone who's learnt to row at university knows that the standard is very, very low when you start. It was spectacularly low. I was rubbish. There's no other description for it. And after a few weeks, the boat club actually asked me not to come down and darken their doors anymore, because they'd just taken women and they were desperate to have girls rowing, but I was just no good. But I had another go a couple of terms later, and our college boatman coached me, and he recognised something in me which no one else had recognised, which was that I might be absolutely useless, but I really, really tried. I really, really tried. And he just concentrated on the relentless gut rhythm and used to make us do our runs wearing Wellington boots to toughen us up, which perhaps wasn't the greatest thing to do, but that was Martin Fordham. Secondly, Steve Gunn, who coached us, he was the assistant coach with Ron Needs in the women's squad for the 88 Olympics, and had a knack with our particular crew. I mean, he wasn't universally successful, but with us, because he managed to recognize our weaknesses and really build on them, and that was enormously helpful. He taught us how to pull, how to hurt ourselves, how to properly hurt ourselves in a way which none of us had really do. And that was very important. But the most important thing he taught us was that, a bit going back to something Pauline said earlier, is that if you believed you could do something, even if you were chasing clouds away, if you truly managed to convince yourself you could do something, you could do it. And Steve managed to convince us that we could do things which we weren't really capable of. And for that, I will be forever grateful.
Jo?
Oh, I'm going to completely cheat, sorry. So I'm going to name 5, because I've got 5 fingers on this hand. So thank you, Bill Stagg, for teaching me technique and to sit up classically, and they're all doing it again now. Sort of very 50s sit up, lay back. Daniel Topolski, thank you for teaching me to be competitive. So I think his phrase was, I like to win, and I like to win by as much as I can. So thank you for putting me through a grueling year where everything was timed and everything was competitive, and for believing in me throughout my rowing career and always being there at any time when I was moaning and complaining and having belief. Thank you, Chris George, for you were way ahead of your time, taking us up to Tower Bridge, and the mileage makes champions, and we did very well that year, I think. And you believed in me too, and put me at stroke, which I didn't think I had any natural rhythm, so you must have seen something there. Rosie Mayglothline told me when I was just paddling about in a single as a reserve in 86, yeah, I think you can be good, sort of had that belief, which was nice. And then Bob Michelanius, Glider, as we know him, for teaching me tactics in a race. So it just really took all of those things, being a magpie and taking everything from those coaches who gave so much commitment, and I really think that we really owe so much to those people who were willing to do that on a voluntary basis and really offered so much. So yeah, I wouldn't have done anything without those people.
Helena.
It took me quite a few years to get the whole thing.
Helena.
My experience isn't entirely relevant, but I'm just in awe that Jo had 5 coaches in her rowing career.
Oh, I'm on that.
Yeah, as a a club person, there were phases in the last 30 years when I did have a coach who was running the squad or the crew that I was in, but I would say it's in the distinct minority, and I've spent an awful lot of time, getting the odd crumb from people here and there, but possibly that has value, because actually when you have a coach, you often look outside the boat for the solution to your problems. Something is not going well. Coach, what should we do about it? And actually having spent a lot of time, and in a way a Cox is always a coach, but having spent a lot of time just going out with crews, and it's just the rowers and me and our Cox, both men and women at different phases, we had to find the solutions for ourselves, which was maybe hard and it was maybe inefficient and there was a lot of trial and error. But it absolutely meant that when we went out and raced, nothing was missing. And one of the great coaching experiences I did have is about 9-10 years ago. I was coached for 7 sessions one summer by Martin McElroy, who'd coached the men's 8 to win at the 2000 Olympics. So obviously the most fantastic coach, but he realised that he was only coming in for 7 sessions over the course of a whole summer. And he was coaching me when I was coxing 4 at York City Rowing Club. And actually what I thought was particularly brilliant, instead of coming in as an Olympic coach and going, you must do this, you must do that, he gave us masterclasses instead. So he left us with the ownership of what we were doing without just taking it away and telling us what to do. And that meant that when we went out and raced, we weren't missing anything, and that was really valuable.
Which is a fantastic reflection, actually, on the skill of the art of being a teacher and being a coach. It doesn't take a good rower. It takes someone to understand how people learn and how they can make an impact. So that's a fantastic insight. Now, rolling back to the beginnings of contemporary British women's rowing, Helena, we've got a question here from April Harper from Weybridge Ladies Rowing Club, and she asks, do you have any stories of Amy Gentry or Eve Gould?
Well, sadly, Eve died in the summer, so and I'd never met her, and I certainly hadn't met Amy Gentry, but I think, Pauline, you'd met both of them from your time at Weybridge Ladies.
Absolutely. Amy Gentry was a leading light of Weybridge Ladies Rowing Club when I joined in, I think, 1968. And at the time she was quite an old lady, but she used to live on, I think it was Ham Court Island, and she always used to paddle her dinghy over to Weybridge Ladies Rowing Club on the Sunday morning, which is when we went out. And that would be in any kind of water. So she would paddle through floodwater and all that in across the weir stream, the Shepperton weir stream, and very, very stylish sculling always. And she always wore a disreputable old hat, a coat that had seen better days, and the most appalling old wellies. And the gag was that she eventually she received an MBE for her services to women's rowing. The gag was that she probably wore her wellies to the palace. I don't think she did, but she was one of that generation of women who, we forget, actually the First World War was very unkind and took out an enormous number of the men that women like Amy Gentry would have married. And they poured their love into things like rowing. And we owe an enormous debt to them. And Eve, I remember terribly well, because Eve was the stroke of the Veteran Ladies 4 that I coxed in 1971 to victory at Weybridge Ladies Regatta. I was a rubbish cox. Helena is a much better cox. But Evelyn and Elsie Stagg and Sylvia Harper and Jo Filkins were the ladies who were in that crew. And they were the most wonderful role models when I first started rowing. So I owe a great debt of gratitude to them.
Can I also just come back to me? So I joined Weybridge Ladies at age 16, and there was a good junior section. And we decided, we better do some of this land training. And we went along, Kate and I go, got in. Okay. So we sort of struggled round doing the sit-ups, the press-ups, the whole circuit, where we had ladies there who, I don't know how old they were then, maybe 50s, 60s, maybe in their 50s, 60s. And so they were just motoring through it. We were red-faced. We finished. We struggled through. And then we all got changed, and they all put on their corsets. They put on their corsets, and we're like, okay. And they had just completely whipped us through the gym, and then off they went, and we puffed our way home. They really were just incredible women. They started that club in 1926, the first women's rowing club, and as I understand, they used to wear suspenders, with their tights and suspenders. They started the women's club because they weren't allowed to join their brothers' road. They formed their own, and fantastic women. And we went down for a row a few years ago. Eve was there. She was 88 years old. She'd done her quad outing that weekend. Fit as a fiddle. Fantastic women, just fantastic.
I have to say that Kate mentioned that she was the first girls in her university rowing club. I was the same in mine. I know Pauline was one of the first women at Thames Tradesmen's Rowing Club. I do think that most of these clubs cannot now think of what the club would have been like without having a mixed membership. And it's a credit to all of you that you've motored forwards and keep flying the flag. Now, we've had a very sad time recently with the passing of Beryl Crockford, who was a contemporary of yours, Pauline, and was also a leading light in high school rowing coaching in the UK. And I think it would be fitting to mention two things. One is that a fund is being raised in her memory to give a trophy in the UK to rowers. And if anyone is keen to support it, and I believe they're about £1,500 short of their target of £10,000. We really commend them to get in touch with Row Perfect, and we'll give you the website to donate on. Aside from that, Beryl was a very much larger than life character, but was also a product of the amateur rowing environment. And I believe I'm right that she was one of the first international medalists, Helena, for Great Britain.
Yes, absolutely. She won our first women's medal at the World Championships because women only started rowing at the World Championships in 1974, I think. Beryl won a silver at heavyweight in 1981 because there was no lightweight rowing there. She was fundamentally a lightweight rower. Maybe you just, I think she had to diet down when she was lightweight, but, she was a small, wiry framed person. So it was really very impressive that she'd done that in her single. And then 4 years later, in the double at lightweight in 1985, she won our first world gold medal. There had actually been 2 British international medals before that. But that was way before women rowed at the Worlds, and we had the Women's European Rowing Championships, which went on for about 20 years in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And in that whole 20 years, there were 2 medals, and not in any way to diss the achievements of the first women's medal, which was actually in the first year. It was a Cox 4, and I think there were 4 entries, and they got the bronze. And so after that, the only medal we got was Penny Shooter's single medal in 1962. So it was really quite thin on the ground, although, to be fair, in the 50s and 60s, British men's rowing wasn't coming home with many medals either.
Good. Now, Pauline, of course, Beryl would have been one of the slightly older crew members when you were training. Tell us what you remember of her as a young woman.
Well, Beryl was a force of nature, and I think that's what you have to understand about Beryl. And she also was somebody with the most fantastically fluid rowing style and massively easy to row with. I was only lucky enough to pair with Beryl once when we were both rowing in the squad, and I remember having an absolutely amazing outing with her. But subsequently, we did race together at veteran level. We raced at the Seville Masters Championship, and bizarrely we trained in a pair to scull in a double to race. In the double, Beryl wasn't quite as fit then as she had been, but she still had the ambition. So we were absolutely world beating for 350 metres, and then had to hang on like hell thereafter. But we enjoyed some fantastic rows on the Tideway. And the other thing about Beryl was that she was fabulous in rough water. When you paddled through rough water in a pair with Beryl, the boat was absolutely rock solid, and there was no question that it was ever going to be anything than an absolutely magnificent row. So I have enormously fond memories of Beryl as a huge character. And obviously people try and think of the more respectable side of Beryl for her victories and things, but she was an enormous party animal and huge fun, and I remember her that way.
Kate?
Well, I first came across Beryl when my first World Championships, which was at Nottingham in 1986, and she lost World Championships. She retired after that. I think I'm right in saying that was her last Worlds, and I think she did the singles there. But she was an incredibly strong influence, albeit brief influence, on me, because she just inspired me, because I knew she'd been successful. I could tell she was pretty small. It seemed to me that she was just than life, and I know that both me and Tish Reid, who was training was in the squad as well, also fairly new to the squad, we both were blown away by Beryl's enthusiasm and her absolute not obsession but complete delight in the sport. The fact that you could get so much out of it, but in order to get so much out of it, she said you had to put an awful lot into it, and that was very true. So she was briefly influential to me, but then she retired, and I didn't really see very much more of her after that.
So I'm going to add one of my own personal memories. With Pauline Seville, I rowed with Beryl, and we had a chat off the water, and she told me a little bit about how she organised the schoolgirl rowing at Lady Eleanor Hollis High School, where she coached for many years. And she told me two very important things which helped to build the club up as a community of people. And one was that every girl who left the school aged 16 or aged 18 left the rowing club with a professional qualification as a weightlifting trainer. She said, if nothing else in life, these girls can always get a job in a gym teaching weightlifting, and they've all got the bit of paper to prove it. And I thought that showed remarkable resource and insight, because those of us who've been in the sport for a while know that people often come back to rowing at times of tension, crisis, or change in their lives. And she was giving them a passport back into the sport, but they obviously didn't know it at the time. The second thing she did, which as a club member like Helena, I have seen many clubs who have strong community and many clubs who have a splintered community or none at all. And the things that create strong community are often very trivial, but they're very powerful, or they appear superficially trivial. And what Beryl did was she insisted that the new girls who were aged 12, 13, 14 were joining the rowing club for the first time. They were taught in their first lessons by the most senior girls in the club. So she said, as a result, every single girl knew every other girl by name. And she said that formed a remarkably strong bond amongst the group. Now, has anyone got anything else they'd like to add about Beryl? Because I think, although it is an indulgence, we owe her so much.
Well, just that, you know, to go and win a silver medal and beat the East Germans. So Sandra Thoma, the Romanian that won, and I can remember watching that race, and it was choppy waters, I think it was tailwind. Just remember Beryl just going through that. She just didn't have any fear. She just was just hopping about when she got her medal, so happy. I think they threw one of them in, I may be wrong, threw Sandra Thoma in. I can remember her, you know, I think it was next year in Lucerne, sort of climbing the tent pole, you know, so she's up. And then someone told me that she did that, and then a Danish rower tried to do the same. He fell off and broke his, his leg. She really was someone who was just, as Pauline has said, a force of nature, but just so positive. I can't remember her ever complaining about things. She just did it. She went out and did it. So she was inspiring. And, she didn't have that fear. She had that confidence. She took her rowing really seriously, but she could have fun too.
Helena, now you know a little bit of the history of Beryl's antics to get funding and sponsorship.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, because of course there wasn't any sponsorship for international rowing at the time, and if you read through any of the reports, the annual reports of the Amateur Rowing Association, which was the governing body of British rowing at the time, it's all about, we haven't got any money, we can't afford this, we can't afford that, we've got all these debts, and it was a great problem. So as well as training really hard and having a job as a PE teacher, or later she was a PE lecturer, she had a hobby of trying to get sort of little bits of sponsorship, and often it was sponsorship in kind, and often it was rather irrelevant sponsorship in kind. So she had a sponsor who gave her a lot of Brazil nuts, and she said she had slabs and slabs of Coke. She used to drive to Coke's head office in Acton, I believe, somewhere near there anyway, and they give her pallets of Coke and she put them in the back of a little car, and she said frankly they drank so much of it that she kind of rather went off it. Probably shouldn't say that to them, but anyway, I think she was very grateful at the time. And one of the little bits of sponsorship, and I think she just did this mostly because it was sort of a fun thing to do, as if she didn't have enough else to do in her life and obviously didn't need the rest or something. And one of the bits of sponsorship she got was with a chain of clothing stores called British Home Stores, which actually went broke a couple of years ago. But back then it was absolutely thriving. So initially she got some sponsorship for her and Lynn Clark, who were in the double together, just for them. But British Home Stores got really interested in this whole women's rowing thing. And so eventually they came up with a whole sponsorship package for the whole women's squad, not the men's squad, for the whole women's squad. And I think that was in force for the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, wasn't it? Yeah. And there was a lot of clothing, but interestingly, it wasn't just giving money to the Amateur Rowing Association to fund the women's squad, although they did do that. But they also had a whole promoting rowing just within the country thing. So they had posters up in their shops that were encouraging women to go rowing. So, British Home Stores were really involved. So, you mentioned a few moments ago about, how much we owe Beryl. Well, actually, literally, British Women's Rowing owes Beryl quite a lot, because she pulled in the whole British Home Store sponsorship. Just adding to that whole thing with her with her sort of little sponsorships for herself. A little anecdote I have. So I first knew Beryl in the 90s when she was coaching at Lady Eleanor Hollis, as you say, and my husband happened to be coaching and teaching at the boys' school that was associated with it next door. So I saw her quite a lot down the rowing club. And she came back one day in quite a senior girls' four that she'd obviously had to sub into because one of the girls wasn't there. And she was wearing a T-shirt that was from a manufacturer of liquid paper that you put over your typing if you've made an error, or over your writing in pen, which was the brand Snowpake, which was certainly around at the time. I'm not sure if it still is. It's not a product I use very much. And so she was wearing this really old, clearly 1970s T-shirt that was really faded, but you could still read the logo on it, which was obviously their advertising logo from the time, and it said "Snowpake covers your boobs."
I think I survived that. I think this
was the 90s. So that's how I remember Beryl, with her amusing sponsorship T-shirt.
Fantastic. I think Road Perfect could make a fortune selling those. Ladies, thank you all very, very much. Your insights, your anecdotes make all of us grateful for your leading the sport into the modern age. And the fact that you have all now restarted rowing sets me actually in fear, because obviously I'm going to have to race you all at some point. And I sincerely hope that you'll come to New Zealand for the World Masters Games next April. To our listeners, please help us spread the word about RowingChat. We would love to have any reviews you have in iTunes or on YouTube. Tell people how to subscribe. using our website. You go to rowperfect.co.uk chat, and you can also subscribe in iTunes or SoundCloud. We love having your suggestions and feedback about each event, and also any ideas you may have for future guests. Next time on Rowing Chat, I'm going to be speaking with Gwyn Batten, also a British women's rower, who also now has a career in professional support administration. Stay with us, and until next time, thanks for listening.